Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into the hidden world of the human imagination. What if I told you that when someone says picture this, it isn't a metaphor for everyone? That for some people it's a literal command, and for others it's completely impossible. Okay, let's start with a really simple exercise. It's going to reveal something pretty profound about how your own mind works. Go on, try it right now. Close your eyes and picture a sunset. So, what do you see? Is it a brilliant orange sun dipping below the horizon? Maybe some faint colors? Or is it just black? Just the back of your eyelids and the idea of a sunset?
Well, how you answered that question places you somewhere on a spectrum of human consciousness that we're only just beginning to understand. On one side, you have a mind that thinks in pure concepts, in facts. And on the other, you've got an inner world so vivid, it's like having a virtual reality headset permanently strapped to your brain. So, on one end of the spectrum, we have aphantasia. This affects about 1 to 5% of us. And for these people, the mind's eye is completely blind. They can't just summon up an image of a loved one's face or even picture their own front door on command. And then, on the total opposite end, you have hyperphantasia. This is something that around 3 to 10% of people experience. We're talking about an inner world so rich and detailed that it can be almost impossible to tell apart from actual real-life sight.
Now, you might think this is some brand new cutting-edge discovery, but actually, it's more of a rediscovery. The idea that we all imagine things differently was first documented way back in the 19th century. It's just that only now is modern science finally able to prove it.
This whole journey really kicked off in 1880 with a simple survey asking people to visualize their breakfast table. But then the idea was kind of ignored for about a century. In 1973, a questionnaire tried to measure it, but it wasn't until 2015 that neurologist Adam Zaman finally gave a name to this experience of having a blind mind's eye, aphantasia.
So, how does this inner projector of ours actually work? And maybe more importantly, why is it a high-definition cinema for some people and just completely switched off for others? Well, the answer is all in the brain's wiring. All right, so get this. When you create an image in your mind, your brain is essentially running the whole process of seeing, but backwards. It's a pretty incredible neurological trick.
Now, this slide is really cool because it breaks down the two different pathways. See, normal sight is bottom up. Light comes into your eyes and the signal moves forward through the brain. But mental imagery, that's top down. Your brain's command center, the prefrontal cortex, sends a signal backwards to your visual cortex. It's basically telling it, hey, render me a sunset. For folks with aphantasia, that top-down signal just doesn't seem to connect.
You know, for decades, all we had to go on were people's own subjective reports of what they could or couldn't see in their heads. But that's all changed. Now, science can actually physically measure the presence or, the total absence of your mind's eye.
And this right here is the incontrovertible proof. Just take the pupillary light reflex. If you have mental imagery, your pupils will literally get smaller when you imagine a bright sun. For aphantastics, their pupils don't change at all. Or look at skin response. When you read a scary story, visualizers literally start to sweat because they're seeing the terrifying stuff in their head. For aphantastics, it's just words on a page, and their physiological response is totally flat. This isn't about what you think is happening, it's biology.
But hold on, the story gets even more complex. It turns out that visualizing isn't just one single skill. Your brain actually has two different visual systems, and believe it or not, they can work completely independently of each other. A really fantastic way to get your head around this comes from computer science. I want you to think of your brain as having both a graphics engine, which renders the images, and a physics engine, which calculates all the spatial relationships. So here's the kicker. Your graphics engine, the part that sees colors and shapes, it can be totally offline. We call that object aphantasia. But your physics engine, the part that understands maps and directions and how things move through space, that can be working perfectly fine. This explains that weird paradox of someone who can't picture their own car, but can navigate an entire city from memory without a problem. So, okay, this isn't just some abstract piece of neuroscience trivia. This stuff fundamentally changes the human experience. It shapes everything from how you remember your own childhood, to how you create art, and even your vulnerability to certain mental health conditions. Let's look at something as simple as reading a book. For a hyperphantastic person, it's a full-on immersive movie. They are in the world that the author is describing. But for an aphantastic, it's like a direct download of plot and data.
They're not getting bogged down rendering all the scenery, so they often read incredibly fast. It's the same book, but two completely different realities.
Now, you'd probably assume that having a blind mind's eye would be a total career killer if you wanted to work in the visual arts, but you would be completely wrong. In fact, one of the co-founders of Pixar, probably the most successful animation studio in history, has aphantasia. And it goes even further than that. Get this. Glenn Keane, the legendary Disney animator behind characters like Ariel and the Beast, he also has aphantasia. He doesn't see the character in his head first. Instead, he creates through a kind of conversation with the page. He draws a line, reacts to that line, and lets the character emerge externally. It's creativity without any mental preview. And then you go to the other extreme, where you have creators like the inventor Nikola Tesla. He was famously hyper-fantastic. He used his incredibly vivid mind's eye as a virtual workshop. He would build, run, and literally stress test his inventions entirely inside his head before he ever touched a single physical tool. This spectrum also has some really profound consequences for our mental well-being. A hyperphantastic mind can be a powerful emotional amplifier. The ability to vividly re-experience negative events can actually increase the risk for conditions like PTSD. On the flip side, aphantasia can act as a kind of protective buffer. Traumatic events are remembered as a list of facts, not a terrifying sensory nightmare that you're forced to relive over and over. So, in the end, the science of aphantasia and hyperphantasia is about so much more than just mental pictures. It proves that we're all navigating the same shared reality, but we're doing it with radically different internal software. And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. If our internal worlds are this different, how can we ever really assume that any two of us experience reality in the same way?